Raider Nation, what's going on? It's Mitchell Renz here, host of the Raiders Report, with my reaction to John Spytek's NFL Combine presser. And if you don't know, I want y'all to hit that subscribe button. I am unbelievably excited to be here in Indianapolis with the Chat Sports team. I've talked to so many people here over the past day, over the past 24 hours already. I'll get you guys another video a little bit later on tonight about some of my biggest takeaways. But the number one thing that I want to talk about today here on this program are my top biggest takeaways from John Spytek's presser. If you didn't see the video that I put out earlier on the channel, it's literally the entire presser from start to finish. But I'm just going to hit on the number one things that I took away from this press conference, being front row and center, looking at the Raiders GM, just hearing what he had to say. First thing we got to talk about is Maxx Crosby. Maxx Crosby, I'm telling y'all right now, is the number one thing that is all things here at the NFL Combine. And one of the things that we were hearing is, could Crosby stay? Could he be going? And it's not a shock that this was one of the very first questions here in this John Spytek presser. And if there's one thing that I've noticed from this Super Bowl and the Combine, it does seem as if there is a lot of hope, I would say, from the Raiders standpoint, that he's going to remain here with the silver and black. But I'm going to kick this thing over real quick to Raiders GM John Spytek so you can hear what he had to say about Maxx Crosby potentially staying in Las Vegas.
Trade talks around Maxx Crosby. Do you anticipate him being in a Raider uniform when the season starts?
I do, yes.
One of the things that I heard in there, and he didn't even hesitate, like there was no hesitation at all that he believed and thought that Maxx was going to be staying here with the Las Vegas Raiders. But that actually wasn't the only thing that John was asked. And again, there's no shock that there was going to be a lot of Crosby questions at this press conference. It's kind of one of the reasons why I was trying to not even ask John anything in regards to Crosby. But the next thing that I heard him really talk about was like his relationship, because, you know, at the end of the day, John was a part of this organization last season. You move on from Pete Carroll. You're looking at a brand new head coach in Clint Kubiak. And for Maxx Crosby, I want to know that he's happy here being in Las Vegas. So one of the things that I saw that we're going to show y'all is what Spytek had to say on his relationship with the Condor, number 98. And a lot of the things that he was saying, yeah, I think it's going to encourage some Raiders fans out there. So we got a clip here. We're going to kick it over to Spytek, and you can kind of hear him break down what he has to say about the relationship with him and number 98, Maxx Crosby.
I am. Maxx is an elite player, and I've been very upfront from the start when I got here that, you know, we're in the business of having really good players on the team, and we need a lot more of them. And, you know, it's hard to build a great team without elite players.
What has been your communication like with Crosby the last month or so?
Maxx and I have a great relationship. He's in the building every day, getting healthy right now. We talk on the phone, we text. So I have a great relationship with Maxx.
When I hear that, the number one thing that I instantly hear is John Spytek telling everybody again that he has a good relationship with Maxx Crosby. And, you know, to me, that excites me. It gets me fired up. But I've also remember what Clint Kubiak had to say at his press conference. Kubiak made it very clear that, hey, listen up. I want Maxx Crosby to be a part of this organization. What does John Spytek do? Makes it very clear that, hey, I want him to be a part of this organization. And the trade rumors, they're going to continue to pop up. But I'm telling y'all right now, based on what I've heard from Spytek, based on what I've heard from Kubiak, based on what I've heard from people that I would consider close to Las Vegas Raiders, it sounds like everybody around the Raiders thinks that Maxx is going to be a Raider. And then you got a lot of the other noise coming from outside of the NFL media. It makes me wonder, is Crosby's team kind of reporting, kind of saying these things like, hey, I don't know if we want to be a part of this organization. So my question to you, and it's going to be the pinned comment here on today's show. If you don't know what that means, it means it's the number one question that I want you to answer from today's video. So scale it for me from 1 to 10. What is your confidence level that Maxx Crosby is going to be a Raider week 1 of the 2026 NFL season? While that ad is playing, I want you to scroll on down, answer that question. My answer is coming up here in just a moment. My confidence level in Crosby being a Raider, it's a 5. It's not going to change. I will admit it kind of reminds me a lot a bit kind of how the Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs situation unfolded for the Silver and Black, which we know how that ended up going. Those two guys found new homes nonetheless. But to me, I do hope that Maxx is a Raider. But if Maxx doesn't want to be a Raider, and I know I've said this before, nobody is above the shield. If Maxx wants to be a Raider, let's get to work. If Maxx doesn't want to be a Raider, then I do think it's time to move on and look elsewhere. Let's go to the next part here of this John Spytek presser reaction. He was asked in regards to Raiders wide receiver Jack Bech. Essentially, do we think that Jack Bech can be a wide receiver one for the Silver and Black? He was drafted in the second round out of TCU last season, number 58 overall, and didn't really get thrown into the mix until halfway through the season, mainly due to Dante Thornton Jr.'s struggles just getting acclimated in that offense. But here's what John Spytek had to say about Jack Bech being a wide receiver one.
I trust Jack Bech, the football player. You know, I mean, where he aligns, we're going to move people all over the place. I think you guys saw how Clint used, JSN. They're going to move them all over the place. So we're not going to be an offense where we just stick a guy and he's the number one guy on the outside. I also don't think there's many of those guys walking around on the face of the earth like you're talking about, the true X's. So if you're lucky enough to get one of them, you hold on to them for dear life, and if you don't, then you make it work with what you got.
I actually love and really respect the way that Spytek answers that question, because nobody wants to throw their guy under the bus, but also at the same time, Bech, I'm a big fan of yours, but at the same time, you're not a wide receiver one in the NFL. Spytek also goes on to say basically wide receiver one, true X's, these outside guys, they don't grow on trees, and they don't grow on trees. But one thing I'm definitely going to be looking for from a free agency and draft standpoint is if Spytek or anybody from this organization starts going, well, hey, that guy is a true X, because true X receivers is something that we heard multiple times last offseason, mainly in regards when, we were talking about DK Metcalf and his connection to Pete Carroll. So to me, if Spytek and this regime start throwing out the term wide receiver one or X receiver, that's going to be an important thing to look at, whether it's somebody in free agency, hopefully like an Alec Pierce, or maybe it's somebody in the draft, somebody that goes a little bit early on. But to me, I know this. Jack Bech, hell of a football player. Could not agree more that he's a hell of a football player. And when you bring in a Clint Kubiak offense, I think one of the qualities that you need in a wide receiver is a receiver that's not selfish. And Bech is a good blocker. He's not afraid to block, because we could talk about Mendoza all we want, but we got to get that ground game going with Ashton Genty. And Jack Bech is somebody who willingly will go out there and block. Not a lot of rookie wide receivers, second-year guys now, are willing to do that. Let's go to the next thing here that Spytek got to talk about, and I always find myself every single Raiders draft talking about, do we go need? Do we go best player available? And when you have the amount of holes that this Raiders team does from top to bottom, it's going to be an interesting equation. So Spytek kind of went on, and he got a bunch of different types of questions, but he kind of went into a little bit depth in terms of his thought process this offseason of need versus BPA. Here's what the GM had to say.
That's where need and best player available come into kind of the equation. I learned a long time ago, if you start forcing needs, you're going to end up picking guys too early and then regret it. So, when it lines up and you've got a need and it's the best guy, it's awesome. It really is. That's how we got Tristan Wirfs in Tampa all those years ago. We needed a tackle, and he was the best one, and run the card in as fast as you can. But we're never just going to say we got this need, and so we're just going to force a player. That's the wrong way to do it. It's not team building.
I agree with the idea that you can't force certain things, and that is true. I think forcing the draft actually is what got John Gruden in trouble. It's where we started, forcing Cleveland Ferrell. We forced Jonathan Abram. We forced Damon Arnett. We forced Alex Leatherwood. Sometimes you just got to take the best player available, and that tells me that Ashton Genty last season was the number one player on John Spytek and the Raiders board for them to take the running back out of Boise State instead of going with the offensive lineman that was a bigger need in Armin Membu. And, it's funny, Spytek even mentioned Tristan Wirfs there, and I actually thought that Armin Membu was somebody that compared to Tristan Wirfs from an athletic standpoint. But not forcing guys is extremely, extremely important. And it kind of reminds me, actually, I meant to say this back when we were talking about Jack Bech being the wide receiver one, and how he was talking about how, Kubiak did a good job scheming JSN open. He did that because he's really good at being able to find his players and using them in the best way possible, which is how I think they're going to use Jack Bech. And I think it's also the way that you have to approach this draft. You can't just sit here right now and today. I'm sitting here, it's February 24th, and talk about what you're going to do in the draft when you have over $100 million in salary cap. You got to tackle salary cap. You got to tackle free agency, and then you're going to be able to turn your attention big time to the draft, which I think is what Spytek is kind of saying in there in that clip. Let's go to the final thing, and this is one of the bigger stories that I've seen circulated around social media, but I'll be very clear. I actually don't think that this has been a story that's been very well covered on Instagram or on Twitter. I think it's being totally blown out of proportion because I want you to hear the entire thing that John Spytek is saying. I saw on Instagram basically somebody saying like, hey, Spytek doesn't believe in starting a rookie quarterback in year one. I actually don't think that's really what he said. It was more along the lines of like, well, I'll let you listen to what John Spytek had to say.
You say bring in a young quarterback? I think you want to have as much pressure, or limit the amount of pressure you have on that guy from the start. Now, if you have a young quarterback, I'm not necessarily in favor of running him out there right away either. So, another quality player that can play the quarterback position if you have a young quarterback, and obviously a great offensive line, a run game, all the things that can limit his chances to really get killed, and a great defense too, because if he doesn't feel like he's got to go out there and score 35 points every week, I think that's helpful.
So the question that prompted that answer, and it's kind of hard to hear, essentially the question was like, what can you do to limit the pressure on a young quarterback? So Spytek saying if you have a young quarterback, I'm not necessarily in favor of running him out there right away either. That kind of tells me what I've been saying, where I want the Raiders to draft Fernando Mendoza, just like I wanted the Raiders to draft Ashton Genty. But just like last year, I said if you don't address the offensive line, then taking Ashton Genty doesn't really make any sense. If the Raiders, with all the money that they have this season in salary cap space, don't do anything to that offensive line, I will sit up here on the Raiders Report and I will say you shouldn't take Fernando Mendoza number 1 overall. But I'm a believer that with the money that the Raiders have, with the people that they have in power, that you're going to be able to get an offensive line. Hell, you drafted 3 players in the 3rd round over the past 2 seasons. So I read that more as like they're not going to throw Mendoza into the fire. But like that's also when Clint Kubiak was asked, are they going to draft Mendoza? And he was kind of, holding his cards close to his chest. They're not going to reveal all these answers. I do expect this, though. I 100% expect the Raiders to add a veteran quarterback this offseason. If you want to know what quarterback I want the Raiders to go get, I talked about him on my social media at Mitchell Renz 365 because you have Aiden O'Connell. Geno Smith's going to be gone. I guarantee 100% chance. And then you got Kenny Pickett. He's going to be a free agent, which means it's Fernando Mendoza, Aiden O'Connell, who's a good quarterback, but I think it's also important to add a veteran. One of the top storylines will truly be what the Raiders decide to do, even if they draft Mendoza, because this means that Tom Brady, John Spytek, and Clint Kubiak, all 3 of those people have not fully committed to the idea of Fernando Mendoza starting week 1 for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I know Brady and I know Spytek both think that sometimes letting a quarterback learn and mature is the best way to get the best version of that franchise quarterback. So coming up here next on the Raiders Report, I'm going to show y'all my reaction to the 4 questions that I was able to ask Spytek. The whole, thing, I'd say the whole press conference is probably about 17-minute video. Please, again, go check it out. It's on our YouTube channel. But also, I was able to ask Spytek personally 4 questions. So you're going to see the 4 questions that I asked him. I'm going to give you my reaction. Before we get into that, though, I want to give a huge shout-out to today's sponsor, PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app out there. You can shoot your shot on PrizePicks and get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. That's right. PrizePicks is now giving you $50 in lineups when you sign up and play your first $5. PrizePicks makes every dunk, every dime, every board that much more exciting. So don't miss the chance to get started on America's #1 app for sports picks. You can also find your community on PrizePicks with the new social feeds feature. You can share PrizePicks with your friends, copy lineups from winners with a single click, copy lineups that you like, use them as inspiration for your own. You can even follow PrizePicks partners like some of my buddies here at Chat Sports. You can follow me as well. And if you don't know where I'm at Mitchell Renz 365. Heck, I mean, literally me and the guys here, again, we are in Indianapolis. The very first night we were here in the building, we were watching Pacers, we were watching the Dallas Mavs, and guess what? A few of the guys, they got a PrizePicks lineup in during this time of the season because I'm not the biggest basketball guy. I do love baseball, but we're still a little bit far away from me getting a PrizePicks lineup in. I think at the end of the day, the reason why I love PrizePicks is because the other day I'm with my buddies. We're at a bar. We're all watching sports. We get a lineup in. And even though I don't really care about the Indiana Pacers and I don't really care about the Dallas Mavericks, being able to sit there, try to put some extra money in our pocket is exactly why I love PrizePicks, and it's the reason why. It's America's #1 app out there, available in all 50 states. So if you have friends and you want to play PrizePicks, then please go download the PrizePicks app today. Make sure that you use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. So let's keep it moving here on my John Spytek presser reaction from the NFL Combine. And a reminder, the 4 questions that you're about to see Spytek answer are all from me, Mitchell Renz, host of the Raiders Report. So you can't really ask here at the Combine, and it's kind of like a fickle mistress that you got to be able to figure out, and how do you get the answer that you want to get. So I knew I wouldn't be able to ask, hey, John, what do you think of Fernando Mendoza? So instead, in my mind, if you're going to take a quarterback at number 1 overall, he better be a franchise quarterback. So my question to John Spytek was, what do you look for in a franchise quarterback? And this is what he had to say.
It's the hardest position to evaluate. So much is required of those guys, and trying to like have a vision for how they played and whatever offense they were asked to run in college, and how they're going to fit into ours, and then how they're going to handle the pressure that comes with being one of 32 in the world is a lot. And so, there's a lot that goes into it. Every year we evaluate the quarterbacks from top to bottom, because you never know if you're going to get one, and you never know if they're going to come back in free agency too. And so it's a constant work in progress, and it's obviously super important.
Leader, tough as hell, loves to play football, prepare, selfless person. If that doesn't sound like Fernando Mendoza to you, then I want to introduce you to the Indiana quarterback who just won the Heisman and the national championship, because that's Fernando Mendoza to a T. And what's also very interesting about a lot of the things that Spytek said, it aligns very, very well with what Clint Kubiak had to say and what he views a franchise quarterback to look like back in 2024, which is a video that I did last week here on this channel. I'll probably put both of those together next week, or maybe a little bit later on this week here at the Combine, because Clint Kubiak and John Spytek, they might not be able to say that they're going to draft Fernando Mendoza, but what they look for in a franchise QB, it looks like and it smells like Fernando Mendoza. Let's go to the next thing here. I was talking to him about the offensive line, and offensive line's never a sexy thing to talk about. It might not grab media headlines, but for me, being a Raider fan the way that I am, and I know the nation, there's a reason why we are the number 1 most watched Raiders channel on the planet. This show will give you a voice, and I know the offensive line is a major question mark here for all fans out there. So I essentially asked him, like, hey, and I tried to make it very clear, like, the offensive line can't be this bad again. I almost wanted to make a joke, but a few of the guys here told me not to do it. I was like, are you happy that Clint Kubiak's kids are too young to coach so we don't have to deal with the Carrolls again? But this is what Spytek had to say on my question in regards to the offensive line and whether or not the Silver and Black would put JPJ back at center or keep him at offensive guard.
Will Jackson Powers-Johnson play center? Do you think he's going to stay in guard?
Whoever the best 5 are, they'll be out there. And I love Jackson. He had a hard season, obviously, for a lot of different reasons. He's healthy now, and we're going to talk to Clint and Rick Dennison and the O-line group, and we'll figure out the best 5 to run with.
So when I hear that, instantly the first thing that I go to is I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit when he said it to me, like, oh, we're going to go with the best 5 offensive linemen, which, sure, you should absolutely positively do. But I also think, like, showing a little bit of vote of confidence to your young center last season who wanted to be the center, introduced himself to Ashton Genty and said, hey, I'm Jackson Powers-Johnson. I'm going to be your center. Like, that's the type of player that I want in the middle of my offensive line, because I do think, like, this tone that you want to set with Genty and Brock Bowers, JPJ is going to be able to do that as well. Comes from a high school wrestling background, and you can tell, dude just throws guys around. But he also showed love to Caleb Rogers, said that, he loves his work ethic. I've heard a lot of positive things about Caleb Rogers. John understands the importance of a good offensive line, especially when you're going to draft a quarterback like Mendoza, especially when you have a ground game like Ashton Genty. But overall, the Raiders really got to figure out what they got in Caleb Rogers, Charles Grant, and you also got to figure out what you got in DJ Glaze. But I've been saying for a while, one of those 3 guys has to step up to be a starter. The fact that Spytek said Caleb Rogers' name makes me wonder if his eyes are already on the 3rd-round pick from Texas Tech just a season ago. Let's now go to free agency. The Raiders are top 2 money according to Over the Cap and Spotrac in terms of salary cap money. You're going to have over $100 million to spend. And I asked John this question, and he kind of laughed at me. And again, like I get why he laughed at me. He's not going to be able to give away all the tricks of the trade. But essentially, I was like, hey, man, what are the biggest needs that the Raiders are going to try to address in free agency? And he laughed at me, but this is what he had to say. What do you think is the Raiders' top priority in free agency this offseason?
I'm not going to tell you that.
Offense, defense.
All of it. I mean, we won 3 games last year. We got to be super. Honest with where we're at, and we've got a lot of needs to address, and we've got a lot of capital to do it.
Spytek knows the Raiders have a lot of holes, and he says a quote in there, and he says, quote, "Got to be honest with where we're at." I think that told me in that moment that he knows that this is a team that's not going to be the maybe 10-win team that Pete Carroll tried to predict last season. It's got to be a team that just shows improvement. Like, in my personal opinion, when you win 3 games a season ago, and 3 games was generous. Like, let's be real. Like, after week 1, that game against the New England Patriots, they were the worst team in the NFL from week 2 all the way through. You can't tell me otherwise. But he knows that there's a lot of ground to keep up. And I think instead of trying to be like, hey, we're going to be that playoff team in year 1. Hey, we're going to be a team that wins 10 games. Let's get to 7, 8, 9 games. Let's show improvement. And because there's just so many holes, he wouldn't say offense. He wouldn't say defense. But, John, if I could say anything, I would rather you invest in your offense in free agency, because there just can't be any question marks in regards to, does Fernando Mendoza have enough around him? If those questions are still being asked come day 1 of the NFL draft, then I don't know if we did a good enough job as an organization to address the offense to put our young quarterback in the best situation possible. Let's go to the final question here, essentially, that I asked John Spytek, and I hit John with Maxx Crosby wants to play for a contender. It's been very well documented that Max wants to win, and Max wants to win right now. So my question to John, does this organization think that they can be contenders first season with Clint Kubiak as the head coach? Max wants to play for a contender. Do you see the Raiders contending this season?
I think we're going to build this team the right way, and this league is littered with examples of teams that went from a top 5 pick to the NFC Championship, the Super Bowl. We've seen it the last couple of years. I mean, the Patriots won 4 games last year, and they were in the big game the year before. The Commanders picked second, and we're in the NFC Championship game. So we're going to build it the right way, and we'll see what comes.
One of the biggest reasons why this entire John Spytek press conference really fired me up was the confidence that Spytek spoke with. And it's not easy standing up there at the podium when you were the worst team in the NFL a season ago. But he sounded confident, and he sounded like he's got a good plan in his mind, and he knows that he's got a lot to be able to work with. But he mentions the Patriots. He mentions the Commanders. And I think we've seen over the past few years in the NFL, you can make that flip in the first year when you bring in the right head coach, when you bring in the right coaching staff, and you use the players in the best possible way. Instead of putting a square peg into a round hole, well, if you have that player, put him into the right spot exactly where he's supposed to go. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that you're going to get here with Clint Kubiak and this young Raiders team from top to bottom. But I will say this, I expect a eventful, and I mean eventful, Raiders offseason where they're swinging for the fences, because you sat back last season and look where you are now. You can't afford to be in this situation again next season. So what I want to know from all of y'all, if you made it this far in my video, I like to consider y'all my real ones. Please grade the questions that I asked John Spytek, and only grade the ones that I asked, right? I mean, I've been very critical of some past Raiders beat reporters. I've been very critical of some Raiders beat writers, and it's very different when you're actually here in person, and I'm not afraid to admit that. But at the same time, I also think that I asked pretty good questions. But at the end of the day, I always want to know how I can improve. I always want to know what you guys have to say. So please give me an A, B, C, D, or F. And before I get out of here, a friendly reminder that I will be dropping another video later on tonight about some of the biggest storylines, about some of the biggest stories that have not been reported yet from the NFL Combine. So make sure you're subscribed, and you guys will be seeing me here in a little bit with some more insights here in Indy from the NFL Combine.